I was 26 years old when the letter came. My Aunt Leah handed it to me with a hesitant look in her eyes. It wasn't an ordinary letter. It was from my parents, people I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. The reason? My younger brother Lucas, who is now 23, had destroyed any hope of reconciliation between us. 5 years ago, Lucas framed me for theft. That one accusation was all it took for my parents to kick me out of their lives completely. Now, the irony of it all was too much to ignore. The letter said they needed my help. They wanted me to testify against Lucas in a lawsuit where he had allegedly stolen $100,000 from their business. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. After everything that had happened, they suddenly wanted my help to bring Lucas to justice. Growing up, Lucas and I never got along. The rivalry between us was fierce, and I blamed my parents for it. They treated Lucas like he was their prized possession, their golden child who could do no wrong. I was just there, an afterthought most of the time. When Lucas was born, the shift was immediate. My parents' attention diverted entirely to him, and I felt like I had to fight for every scrap of their love and approval. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. As Lucas got older, he picked up on the competition too. Instead of discouraging our clashes, my parents seemed to enjoy the drama. It was as though they thrived on pitting us against each other. Looking back, I wish things had been different. Maybe if they had intervened, if they'd tried to make us see each other as brothers instead of rivals, we might have grown up liking each other. Instead, resentment festered between us, growing stronger with each passing year. The breaking point came 5 years ago during winter break. I was home from college, trying to survive the awkward family dynamics, when Lucas and I had one of our usual arguments. I don't even remember what it was about. But the next evening, Lucas claimed his debit card was missing and demanded that we search the entire house for it. We tore apart every room, turned the furniture inside out, but it was nowhere to be found. Just when I thought we'd give up, Lucas stormed into my room. I should have known something was off, but I was too frustrated to think clearly. He rifled through my belongings, and moments later he found his card in my wallet. I felt my stomach drop. It was like a scene out of a bad movie. Lucas's face contorted into a perfect mask of betrayal and outrage. He yelled that I'd stolen his card. My parents rushed in, eyes wide with horror. I knew it wasn't true. Lucas must have slipped the card into my wallet. But my denials fell on deaf ears. He pushed me out of my room, locking the door so he could check my stuff. My parents didn't stop him. They just stood there, letting the humiliation sink into my bones. When he emerged minutes later, he was holding a brand new MacBook. My MacBook. Lucas screamed that I had drained his bank account to buy it. I hadn't even opened it yet. I'd saved up for months to buy that laptop with my own money. But the truth didn't matter. He wailed about his empty account, about how he'd been saving for a car, and how I had ruined his plans. The tears worked like magic. My parents, their faces twisted in disappointment, turned their anger on me. They didn't ask for my side of the story. They didn't listen to my explanations. All they saw was their favorite son, devastated and betrayed. They told me they were ashamed of me, that they couldn't believe they'd raised a thief. Then, they told me to pack my things and leave. I pleaded with them, desperate for them to hear the truth. But their minds were made up. My father said they would stop paying for my college tuition, leaving me stranded in my final year. I was numb, disbelief coursing through me as I packed what little I could carry. When I stepped out of the house, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. I didn't know where to go or what to do. But then I remembered Aunt Leah. She was my mom's older sister, a woman who had always seemed to understand me better than anyone else. When I showed up on her doorstep, broken and lost, she didn't hesitate to take me in. Her husband, Uncle Joe, helped me too. They scraped together enough money to keep me afloat, to help me finish school. I can never repay them for that kindness, but I've been trying ever since. For 5 years, I kept my distance from my family. I built a life without them. I didn't want updates. I didn't care to know what Lucas or my parents were up to. As far as I was concerned, they were ghosts. And now, after all this time, they wanted me to come back and help them. The weight of the decision pressed on me. How do you help the people who abandoned you? How do you trust the family that destroyed you? I stared at the letter for what felt like hours. The words blurred together, a swirling mess of apologies, justifications, and desperation. My parents claimed they were sorry for how they'd treated me, sorry that they'd trusted Lucas over me, sorry that they'd thrown me away like garbage. But it wasn't the apology that caught my attention. It was the request. They wanted me to testify in court against Lucas for embezzling $100,000 from their business. It was almost comical. After everything that had happened, they finally realized Lucas wasn't the perfect son they thought he was. Now, they needed me, the son they'd discarded, to help them fix the mess he'd created. I couldn't decide if I felt angry, vindicated, or just tired. Aunt Leah sat beside me, watching me with concern. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to, Caleb," she said softly, her voice steady and calm. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." I nodded, my mind swirling with a storm of emotions. A part of me wanted to laugh in their faces, to tell them that karma had finally caught up with them. But another part of me, the part that still felt that old nagging guilt, wondered if I should help them. Would it be wrong to turn my back when they finally admitted they'd been wrong? I took a deep breath. "What do you think, Aunt Leah?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think you've worked hard to build a life without them. You've found peace, and you deserve that peace. But I also know you have a good heart. If helping them feels right to you, then do it. But if it doesn't, don't let guilt push you into it." Her words settled into me like a gentle weight. I knew she was right. I had a choice, and for once I needed to make it for myself, not out of guilt or obligation. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Memories of that day 5 years ago flooded my mind. The look of betrayal in my mother's eyes, the cold anger in my father's voice, Lucas's fake tears, and the smug glint in his eyes as he watched me pack my bags. They hadn't believed me then. They hadn't listened. And now they expected me to come back and save them? It felt like a cruel joke. But still, the guilt gnawed at me. What if I was being selfish? What if my refusal to help them meant Lucas got away with his crimes? My parents were victims now, just like I had been. Did that make us the same in some twisted way? The next morning, I decided to talk to Aunt Leah again. She was in the kitchen making coffee, her hands moving with the kind of practiced ease that spoke of years of routine. "Aunt Leah," I began, my voice hesitant. "What would you do if you were me?" She set down the coffee pot and looked at me, her eyes kind and wise. "I'd remember who was there for me when I needed help, and I'd ask myself if those people are the ones who deserve my loyalty now." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was right. When I was at my lowest, my parents turned their backs on me. It was Aunt Leah and Uncle Joe who picked me up, who supported me through everything. They didn't ask for anything in return. They simply loved me and believed in me. My parents had chosen Lucas over me. Now, they were dealing with the consequences of that choice. And while I could sympathize with their pain, it didn't erase what they'd done to me. They hadn't earned my loyalty, and their sudden change of heart didn't feel genuine. It felt desperate. I took a deep breath, the decision finally settling in my chest. "I'm not going to help them," I said quietly. Aunt Leah smiled gently, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "I think that's the right choice, Caleb." Relief washed over me, mixed with a tinge of sadness. It wasn't easy to let go of the hope that my parents would one day love me the way I'd always wanted them to, but holding on to that hope had only hurt me more. It was time to move forward, to keep building the life I wanted. Later that afternoon, I sat down with Aunt Leah and asked her to deliver my decision. I didn't want to write back to my parents or speak to them directly. It was too painful, and I didn't trust myself to stay strong if I heard their voices. Aunt Leah understood. She promised to let them know that I wouldn't be helping them, that I wanted no part in their lawsuit or their lives. As the days passed, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. My parents' problems were no longer my problems. Lucas's betrayal, their favoritism, their lack of faith in me, it all belonged to the past. I focused on my job, on my friends, and on the small but meaningful life I'd built. My girlfriend Emily was a bright spot in my days, her laughter a reminder that happiness was possible even after years of pain. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. The wounds my family left behind would take time to heal. But for now, I was okay. I was free, and that freedom was worth everything. A week went by after Aunt Leah told my parents about my decision. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. One afternoon, after a long day at work, I came home to find a message on my phone. It was from my old Facebook account, one I hadn't used in years. The message was from my mom. I hadn't even realized she knew how to find me there. Her words were carefully chosen, filled with a familiar mix of guilt and manipulation. She said they weren't just contacting me because of the lawsuit. They claimed they'd been wanting to reach out for a long time, but were ashamed of what they'd done. I sat there reading her words, my stomach twisting. They wanted me to be the bigger person. They wanted me to forgive them, to let the past go. My mom said they'd realized how wrong they were after Lucas's betrayal, that they'd told him so. It was supposed to make me feel better, I guess, but all I felt was anger. They hadn't come to this realization because they loved me or missed me. They were only here because they'd lost faith in their golden child, and now they were scrambling to repair what they'd broken. It felt hollow, like a bad performance. I didn't respond right away. I let the message sit there while I tried to figure out what to do. I wanted to block them, to shut the door on that part of my life forever. But some old part of me, that boy who used to crave their approval, hesitated. I didn't want to admit it, but their words still got to me. The guilt, the sense of obligation, the ache of wanting to belong. It was all still there, buried deep under years of anger and hurt. I called Aunt Leah that night. She answered on the first ring. "They reached out to me on Facebook," I said, my voice tight. She sighed. "I'm not surprised. They're desperate, Caleb. But remember, desperation isn't the same as love." "I know," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "But it's hard. They're my parents." "They may be your parents by blood, but that doesn't mean they've acted like parents," she replied softly. "You don't owe them anything, Caleb. You've given them enough of your heart. It's okay to protect what's left." Her words grounded me. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. She was right. I needed to protect myself. The boy who got kicked out 5 years ago had wanted nothing more than their love and approval. But the man I was now had learned to stand on his own. I decided to respond, but I kept it short. "I don't want to get involved. Please respect that. I'm blocking you now. Don't try to contact me again." I hit send, then blocked them. My heart was pounding, but there was a strange sense of relief too, like I'd cut a rope that had been holding me down for years. But that relief didn't last long. A few days later, I came home to find my parents standing outside my apartment building. I froze, my mind racing. How did they find me? Then I remembered an old friend I'd fallen out with, someone who must have given them my address. My mom's face crumpled when she saw me. My dad looked stiff, uncomfortable, but determined. They took a step toward me, their arms outstretched, as if they expected me to fall into their embrace. I didn't move. "Caleb," my mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's been so long, we just want to talk." I clenched my fists, my jaw tight. "Why are you here?" "We want to fix things," my dad said, his voice gruff. "We know we messed up, but we want to make it right." I laughed bitterly. "You want to fix things now? After 5 years? After you threw me out like I was nothing?" "We were wrong," my mom cried. "We see that now. Please, just give us a chance." I was so tired of the drama, the pain, the endless cycle of hope and disappointment. I didn't want to do this anymore. Not with them. "Go home," I said quietly. "I don't want you here." My mom sobbed, clutching at my arm. "Please, Caleb. We love you. We need you." I pulled away. "You need me because Lucas betrayed you. That's not love." My dad's face darkened. "Don't be so stubborn, Caleb. We're trying to apologize." "No," I said firmly. "You're trying to use me. Again. I'm done being your backup plan." They stared at me, stunned. For the first time, I saw them for who they really were. Broken people who had made bad choices and were now facing the consequences. But their consequences weren't my responsibility. I turned away, heading up the stairs to my apartment. My mom's wailing followed me, but I didn't look back. Inside comma. I locked the door and leaned against it, my breath shaky. My heart felt heavy, but there was strength there too. I'd stood my ground. I'd chosen myself. A few hours later, I called Aunt Leah and told her everything. She listened, her voice calm and steady. "I'm proud of you, Caleb," she said. "You did the right thing." Her words settled deep in my chest. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The days after my parents' visit were a mix of relief and exhaustion. I thought blocking them and standing my ground would be the end of it, but they were relentless. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from unknown numbers. I didn't answer. When the calls stopped, the texts started, long messages filled with guilt trips, begging, and accusations. My mom told me I was heartless. My dad said I was stubborn and ungrateful. They claimed they didn't deserve this after everything they'd done for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I ignored it all. I'd spent years learning to live without their approval, and I wasn't about to let them drag me back into that chaos. One evening, I sat on my balcony, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting the city in a golden glow. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain. Emily joined me, 2 mugs of tea in her hands. She handed me one and sat beside me, her shoulder brushing mine. "You look tired," she said softly. I took a sip of the tea, the warmth soothing my frayed nerves. "I am. I thought cutting them off would feel final, but it's like they're clawing their way back into my life." She nodded, her gaze steady. "It's because they don't know how to let go. They're losing control and they can't handle it." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I just don't understand why they care so much now. Where was this desperation when I was begging them to believe me, to love me?" Emily reached for my hand, her fingers lacing with mine. "You know, sometimes people don't realize what they have until they lose it, but that doesn't mean you owe them a second chance." Her words were like a balm on an old wound. I squeezed her hand gently. "I just want peace. I want to move forward without feeling like I'm always looking over my shoulder." "You deserve that," she said. "And if they can't respect your boundaries, then they don't deserve a place in your life." I nodded. Emily had a way of cutting through the noise and helping me see things clearly. Her love was steady, without conditions or expectations. It was the kind of love I'd spent my whole life searching for, only to realize I'd never find it with my parents. And that was okay. But peace didn't come easily. A week later, I came home from work to find my aunt waiting for me, her face tense. My heart sank. "What happened?" I asked. She sighed, shaking her head. "Your parents showed up at my house again. This time they weren't asking, they were demanding." My jaw tightened. "What did they say?" "They wanted me to convince you to help them," Aunt Leah said, her voice tight with anger. "When I told them no, they accused me of turning you against them. Your mother said I was jealous because I never had kids of my own." I felt a wave of fury rise up in me. "They said that to you?" She nodded, her eyes softening. "It doesn't matter, Caleb. I know the truth, and so do you. Their desperation is making them cruel, but you don't have to let it touch you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady the anger bubbling inside me. "I'm so sorry, Aunt Leah. You don't deserve any of this." She smiled gently, her eyes shining with warmth. "Don't apologize. I'm proud of you for standing your ground. This isn't your burden to carry." Her words reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten. I wasn't alone. No matter what my parents did, I had people who loved me. Aunt Leah, Uncle Joe, and Emily, they were my real family. They didn't care about blood or obligation. Their love was given freely, without strings attached. I knew I had to take action. I couldn't keep living with this constant fear of my parents showing up, of their words poisoning the peace I'd fought so hard to build. The next day, I spoke to a lawyer. I explained everything, the harassment, the visits, the messages. He listened carefully, his face serious, and then he nodded. "We can file for a restraining order," he said. "It'll give you some legal protection and set clear boundaries." It felt extreme, but I knew it was the right thing to do. My parents had crossed too many lines, and they showed no signs of stopping. I couldn't let them keep pushing their way into my life. I had to protect myself. When the restraining order was granted, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a shield. A declaration that I was no longer willing to be a pawn in their game. A few days later, Aunt Leah called to say my parents had received the notice. They were furious, of course. My mom sent one final email, a hateful mess of anger and regret. She accused me of betrayal, of being heartless, of abandoning my family when they needed me most. I read it once and deleted it. Her words had no power over me anymore. That evening, I sat with Emily on the balcony, the stars just beginning to peek through the darkening sky. The world felt quiet, peaceful. I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Yeah, for the first time in a long time, I really am." I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come or hoping for love that wasn't there. I was free to build a life on my terms, surrounded by people who truly cared for me. And that freedom, that peace, it was worth everything I'd been through. It's strange how quiet life becomes when you finally let go of things that hurt you. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but peaceful. Like standing in a forest at dawn, the air still and full of possibilities. That's what my life felt like after the restraining order went into place. For the first time in years, I felt safe. The constant hum of anxiety in the back of my mind had finally gone silent. A few weeks passed, and I settled into my routine. Work was going well, my relationship with Emily was growing stronger, and Aunt Leah and Uncle Joe were just a phone call away whenever I needed to hear a comforting voice. I was making plans for the future, thinking about things like promotions, maybe even buying a home someday. They were the kind of dreams I never let myself have when I was younger. Back when I was always afraid that everything would be ripped away again. One Friday evening, Emily and I were packing boxes in my apartment. We were moving into a new place together, a little rental house with a small backyard. Nothing fancy, but it felt like a step forward. As we packed, Emily laughed, holding up a worn-out hoodie I'd had since college. "Are you really bringing this?" she teased, raising an eyebrow. I grinned. "Of course, that hoodie's been through everything with me." She shook her head, but she smiled. "All right, but it's living in the closet. No wearing it out in public." I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. These moments, the laughter, the teasing, the simple joy of being together, they were worth more than anything I'd ever lost. As we taped up the last box, my phone buzzed on the counter. For a second, my stomach clenched with old fear. But then I reminded myself. My parents couldn't reach me anymore. I picked it up and saw it was Aunt Leah. I answered right away. "Hey, Aunt Leah." "Hey, Caleb," she said, her voice gentle. "I just wanted to let you know. Your brother's trial is over. He was convicted of embezzlement. He's facing 3 years. I paused, taking a moment to let it sink in. Lucas, the golden child, the one who had framed me, who had been the center of my parents' world, now he was facing the consequences of his choices. "How do you feel about it?" Aunt Leah asked softly. I took a deep breath. "I don't know. I guess I'm not happy about it. But I'm not sad either. It just feels like justice finally caught up to him." She paused, then said, "I think that's fair. It's not your burden to carry." She was right. Lucas's choices were his own. My parents' mistakes were theirs. None of it belonged to me anymore. I'd spent so many years carrying the weight of their actions, their favoritism, their rejection. But I didn't have to carry it anymore. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I'm okay, Aunt Leah, really." "I know you are," she said, pride in her voice. "And I'm so proud of you, Caleb." After I hung up, I stood there for a moment, looking out the window. The street below was filled with the glow of streetlights and the sound of life moving forward. Emily came up behind me, slipping her arms around my waist. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, leaning back into her embrace. "It's over. Lucas got convicted. She didn't say anything right away, just held me tighter. "Are you all right?" I nodded. "I am. It's strange, but I feel lighter, like the past doesn't have its hooks in me anymore." She smiled softly. "Good. You deserve that freedom." We stood there in the quiet, the world outside moving on, and I realized that I was too. The past couldn't be changed, and the people who hurt me would have to live with the choices they made. But I didn't have to let their choices define me. Moving day came, and as we packed up the last of my things, I felt a sense of excitement. A new chapter was beginning, one I was writing for myself. The old wounds were still there, but they were healing. Slowly, steadily, I was learning to live with the scars, to let them be a part of my story without letting them control me. That night in our new home, Emily and I sat on the floor, eating takeout and surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. The house smelled like fresh paint and possibilities. I looked around and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. "This is good," I said, smiling at Emily. "This feels right." She smiled back, her eyes sparkling. "It is right, and it's just the beginning." She was right. The pain of the past was real, but so was the joy of the present and the promise of the future. I wasn't that lost, angry boy anymore. I was a man who had fought for his peace, who had chosen to let go of what hurt him and embrace what healed him. As we sat there together, the night stretching out around us, I knew I had finally found what I was looking for. Not in my parents' approval or my brother's downfall, but in the simple, steady love of the people who stood by me. In the quiet moments that spoke of new beginnings, I was home.